Hey, it's Jessica Namasa with WTF Health. What's the future of health? I am talking to the who's who of health tech and healthcare innovation. And today we are getting into a conversation about what is changing for the future of clinical research with our friends over there at Pfizer. So please welcome their head of clinical trial experience, Judy Sewards, and their head of clinical development and operations, Rob Goodwin. Rob, Judy, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I
Hey,
am
Jessica.
so excited to talk to both of you because there has been so much going on in the health tech space around clinical trials. And I think after the pandemic, we are all very hot on a lot of different things in terms of decentralized clinical trials, real world evidence, real world data. And so I'm so excited to hear just how real these things are, especially at a big organization like Pfizer. So, Rob, why don't you kick it off for us? I mean, my first question is about decentralized clinical trials because I feel like we just keep hearing like, okay, the pandemic helped prove this as a way to do trials, but tell us what's going on at Pfizer. Just how ubiquitous is this approach, decentralized trials, or like even a hybrid approach where it's like site plus digital? Like what's going on? I mean, is this really taking a hold in clinical research as much as we think it is?
I think it is. We're really, really excited about it. I think maybe the better word is obsessed, because we really believe it's the right way to go. If you just take a personal experience, before the pandemic, I always talked about decentralized visits, decentralized trials. I really pontificated a lot, but it wasn't actually until the pandemic where I had to do my first telehealth visit at home. And it really taught me a lot. All the things I've been telling everybody, oh, just, it's easy, you can do this. It really put me a little bit on my tail, in terms of, the first time you do it, right, really logging in and the experience. Um, but what we found since the pandemic is that we've all been through that, pretty much all of us. And at Pfizer here, 47% of our visits are virtual since the pandemic. How did that happen? Well, it started off first where we had to all take a step back and sort of how are you going to conduct clinical trials in a pandemic, right? So we went through a phase where we had to rethink everything we did. And of course, putting the participant first, thinking about their safety and thinking about how we maintain those trials, the integrity of them. And then everything else kind of fell from there in terms of, all right, so what do we need to do? The interesting thing about all this was it wasn't the regulators that told us we couldn't do things. I think what we all learned is it was probably us. So, sponsors who were probably more conservative about these methods before the pandemic. But when we had to fully embrace them, we all jumped right in, right? And so, at Pfizer today, we do many different methods. It might be telehealth. It could be at-home visits. It might be direct to patient with respect to, their study drug. It could be a wearable, a diary. There's all these different things that we're exploring and using on these trials. But what we have found is that not one size fits all. And so, you talk a lot about decentralized trials. I believe in those, but I believe more in decentralized visits right now because I do believe in the contact with the physician. And it's a way, not every participant is ready for a decentralized visit. So they deserve the options. And so with the decentralized visit sort of method, we can give them options. It could be in the office, it could be at home, it could be telehealth. And so we really believe it's the right way to go. And so we're super excited about it. And actually, I think the industry is not just Pfizer.
So, Rob, I think that's awesome that there is just this great support for the decentralized approach, or even like you just said, the approach that best suits the patient, both on the trial side and the visit side. I'm curious though about the barriers that exist, and one of the things that you just said that really struck me is that like it wasn't the regulators that were holding this up. It was maybe the sponsors. So I'm wondering if both of you can elaborate on that a little bit. Like when we're thinking, about how this is going to play out longer term, I mean, what are some of the immediate barriers that are in place right now when it comes to the implementation of the decentralized approach? Judy, why don't you, I mean, what are some of the things that are stopping that?
Yeah, sure. So I know here we're talking about decentralized trials and the adoption of them, but I think what I want to really flag is what happens before a trial begins, right? And before, we're even implementing a trial in a decentralized way. For us, I think access and awareness continues to be a persistent barrier. Through the pandemic, I think there are more people in the world right now who know what a clinical trial is and why they're conducted, right? We saw it unfold before us in the news. But I think if you ask all these people, how do I learn how to participate? I've decided that I really want to get involved. What's my first step? I think that awareness piece is actually missing. So there's a lot of work that we need to do up front, really to educate individuals who are interested on how to get involved and what those first steps are. The other aspect I highlighted is access, right? And access takes many forms. Like access is, can I have the right, is there a trial in my location, right? Does the trial fit into my life? And I think, that's where decentralized comes in, but we're really trying to address some of those access and awareness barriers up front before we get into the decentralized. And maybe Rob, you can talk a little bit about some of the barriers once we implement a decentralized trial.
Absolutely. I want to first talk about the first barrier that was removed for us. So, early in the pandemic, CMS ruling, which was, a physician could get reimbursed at the same rate, right, for a in-home as opposed to in the office, it changed the landscape for us, right? It really created a different feel for our investigators in terms of how they could actually conduct a clinical trial. So that was the first barrier that got removed for us, right? So that was awesome. When we talk about decentralized trials, visits, et cetera, we often become too US focused. And remember, most of us run global clinical trials. And so we have to really think about the landscape around the world. And in the US, as an example, I think the regulators have been wonderful. They really understood kind of what we were all going through, and they understood the main thing, which was around safety of patients in the trials, right? Keeping the integrity of the trials running, et cetera. So, that was a barrier that was removed, and we hope it stays that way, right? So how can we continue down that path? In Europe, we had a period of where we were allowed to do more decentralized type of methods. Remember, one part also about these trials is even if a patient is coming into a trial, that still needs to be monitored. And so, we were allowed at that point to be able to do a monitor working from home, reviewing records, right, rather than traveling to the site. But remember, in Europe, the GDPR rules, it really constrains us in terms of how we'll do that. And so those are a few barriers that we still have to work through as part of this. And then finally, it's just the patient themselves, right? So we take it for granted that everybody has good internet. We take it for granted that everybody has access to a phone or a device, and that's really not true. And so we have to be more cognizant when we do these types of trials, that we're really thinking about the population, like Judy said, thinking about inclusion and all these other aspects, so that if we are in a certain population where they don't have access, we're providing them. And we're teaching them how to use them. So it's not good enough just to give them a phone or say, we'll get them Wi-Fi. We really have to help them be able to use the technologies if we really want this to work. So those are just a few of the barriers that come to mind. But for every challenge, there is a solution. And so we have to be in solution mode right now, rather than just bemoaning about some of the challenges.
Right. So Judy, we've just been talking about the different barriers to decentralized clinical trials, and I want to kind of switch topics to one of the really positive things that I keep hearing about this approach in the sense that, as Rob said, Pfizer is a global business. And so you're conducting trials all over the world. And here in the US, if we're going to take a US centric look at things, it's like our participation in clinical trials is not very diverse. I read a statistic from the FDA in 2020 that said that 75% of trial participants are white. So one of the things that people are looking at with this decentralized approach is that, like you said, it helps improve access, and then hopefully through that helps improve diversity. So I'm curious about, how Pfizer is looking at what that potentially expanded population of patients can mean for the future of clinical research.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Jessica, because I think, it's a really critical one and one that I'm particularly passionate about in regards to this topic. So we all know that race, ethnicity, biological sex, and other genetic factors can all impact how different people respond to a particular medicine or vaccine. And so that's why participation from people of all different backgrounds is so important. It's not just a matter of equity, but also a matter of good science. And ultimately, the more diverse a group of participants is, the more that we can learn about the safety and the efficacy of that potential medicine or vaccine. So Pfizer made a commitment to increasing diverse participation in our clinical trials. In the US, that looks like, ensuring that reflects our community, whether that be census or epidemiology. As we know, certain diseases may impact certain populations differently. And so when it comes to decentralized trials, it gives us the opportunity to allow access and provide the opportunity for more people to participate. And so, if you have the flexibility to have those trial visits at home, or that you can fill in some of the information in the diary or whatever else, that reduces that burden on the participant. And that's something that we're always constantly looking at. But I think it also goes beyond decentralization, right? There are other things that we need to do in order to ensure that we're engaging with the right communities appropriately. And that starts with partnering across the ecosystem. So we know that having diverse sites or doctors who reflect the community are critically important. We know that providing information in culturally appropriate and sensitive ways is also very important. And then we're also establishing partnerships across the board. So for example, we have a partnership with Columbia University, which is right in our backyard of our headquarters, to really raise awareness about clinical trials, but also health in general, to really engage diverse communities as we go. But I think lastly, what's most importantly is start sharing that commitment and having that commitment start internally. So, at Pfizer, we don't have like one group that is, focused on diversity way over here, but each and every colleague is sharing in that commitment, and every study team is sharing in that commitment so we can make progress in this area.
That's awesome. And Judy, I want to stay with you for a second here, because while we're on the subject of like patients here, I'm curious, like you're running clinical trial experience, we're talking a lot about the benefits to, our population at large, or to the advancement of healthcare innovation, or the development of new breakthrough drugs and therapies. But what do you think the impact has been, on patients of having this increased access to, or the increased integration of technology in these study processes?
Yeah, sure. So I think, in our day-to-day lives, everybody, right, is interwoven with technology. And so when we think about the clinical trial experience, our goal is to make sure that a clinical trial can fit as easily and as comfortably into every participant's life. Like, a clinical trial participant is someone who's a volunteer. They are raising their hand, they're stepping forward and saying, I am sharing my time, my energy, and a part of my life to help potentially make progress for a new medicine. So I think for us, incorporating technology into our clinical trials is all about making it more convenient and comfortable for those participants. I think very simple things such as travel, right? Yeah. To have to travel an hour to a study site is a challenge for participants. And if we can reduce that to nothing, or to another location, etc., that's really reducing that burden as we go. And so I think as we look at technology and what we can employ, I think the lens that we're looking at is, how are people using technology in their lives? And then how can we incorporate that into some of the things that we're doing within the clinical trial?
Robert,
Judy, if I could really,
go ahead.
Could I bring that? I want to bring that example to life a little bit, if we could.
Sure.
So if we think about our COVID-19 vaccine, and Judy will be the first to always say thank you to all the participants that volunteered for our trial. You are truly the heroes for us. And all the investigator sites that participated. I mean, what a huge difference you've made. And that trial was mainly a decentralized trial. So while that patient would go to the site, get the first visit, they would go home with a diary, track all their symptoms, signs and symptoms. If they had a symptom, create a telemedicine visit, right? At that telemedicine visit, the site would walk them through swabbing themselves. That swab would then get picked up, right? Transferred to our labs where we could analyze it. So imagine an experience now for a patient where, of course, the first, because we had to set them up, but then everything is really at home. And during probably one of the worst times where nobody really wanted to leave their home, and how that experience really, sort of transcended the rest of trials, how you realize that during that process, while that be for the pandemic, that is the same processes you could use essentially all your trials, e-consenting, so that you have a record of the consent of that patient, and tracking that all the way through the number of different amendments that we had as part of that protocol. So I think that was a great example. In addition, to make their life easier, we had visits after hours, so not the normal 9 to 5, and then on weekends. So typically in clinical trials, that's not what we do, right? We sort of work on a schedule. But I think, thinking about the participant first, thinking about, particularly in diverse populations where they might not be able to leave work. I think how you design your trials, the use of technology, but also a more compassionate way of executing the care is really what I think is going to differentiate the clinical trials of the future.
I love that. And I got to ask this question, and I hate to bring it back to dollars and cents, but Rob, seriously weigh in on this, because I hear all this is the thing. It's for all the health tech enthusiasts out there, we're like, yes, improved accessibility, more convenient, better patient engagement, better engagement from investigators. You can stand things up quickly, speed, we saw it with COVID. When it comes down to talking about reducing the cost of drug development, that's the thing that I feel like people are like, well, is there any truth to that right now? Can decentralized trials really impact and lower the cost of the development of drugs and therapies? And if not now, as you guys are looking at this, because it's early days in adopting this approach, what are you seeing for the potential long term?
All right, so I'm going to answer that with two different points of view.
Okay.
So the first is, all innovations will cost you a little at first, right? Particularly because our number one thing is that we have to make sure that anything we're doing in innovation is as good or better when it comes to quality compliance than the methods we already have in place. So you really have to prove that out, right? That's a very important step. But as these become more ubiquitous and we start using them more, just like anything else, they become commoditized and the cost goes down. Now, you may spend a little extra maybe on one of these innovations at first, but if you can recruit your trial faster, overall, the cost of development goes down and the speed to patient goes up. Right? So you have to look at it from two different lenses. You can't just focus on the dollars, and you can't just focus on sort of the speed that may bring you. You kind of got to bring it together. But if you take a look at the work we've done, whether it be, as I mentioned in our landmark trial, right, getting to patients in a different way, that sped the recruitment and of course the medicine to all of us. We're doing that in a number of trials today we call lightspeed. And so thinking about how you deploy decentralized methods to create a better experience for the patients, which means you can recruit, quicker because you're touching different patient populations you may not have touched before. There's often a myth that if you go into diverse populations, it's going to slow you down. Actually, we believe it should speed you up because you're going to populations that typically haven't been part of clinical research, right? So you're opening a new sort of population that you could bring into your clinical trials. So I just think that, depending on what side of the fence, you'll say it's more expensive, or you'll say it's less expensive, depending on what argument you want to have. I believe that initially it is a little more expensive, but the payoff is that you get the medicines to patients faster, and in the end, that's better for patients, but it does drive down the cost of clinical research.
Okay, I have to ask about this other thing too then, Rob. I'm sticking with you here. Real world evidence, real world data. That was another, those two buzz phrases lit up during the pandemic. Truly, and I think ignited everybody's imagination about what could be done, what data could be reviewed differently as it's being collected, real world, and how that would impact future of drug development, drug discovery. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about how Pfizer is looking at RWE and RWE and put it into context for us. Is this a real thing that's taking hold in pharma, or are we just hearing about this kind of because of the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, so it's not new, of course, okay? This has been happening for a very long time. But yes, the pandemic and the COVID vaccine really sort of got everyone's mind moving. Just like Judy mentioned, how it got people more aware about clinical trials and, sort of what that meant to participate. So it's the same thing here with real world data. From real world data, we create evidence, right? So if you think about for a very long time, data has been collected on all of us, whether in claims, pharmacy, medical records, et cetera. What the pandemic really showed us, in just one example, how it can be utilized to help, really understand what's happening in real world. So if we take the US as an example, right, the VAERS database, where all the information on the adverse reactions were being collected across all the vaccines. And that information was constantly being reviewed to understand what was happening in the populations. Did we have the right doses? right? Where you know, was things happening with different age groups. All those types of activities, that's the value of real world data that can then turn into real world evidence. Same thing for us in Israel, right? There was a population, if you look at the Pfizer vaccine as an example, it was just a Pfizer vaccine. It was a perfect way of really sort of following in real world the continuation of the work we did in our clinical trials, and now following that into populations, and maybe in patients that we didn't expect that might get our vaccine. So when you have this ability to, you know, essentially perform a randomized trial, right, controls, and then go beyond that and move it into the real world setting to understand how it is really sort of being utilized, you know, as part of normal clinical practice, you have the benefit of both. Now, the other benefit there is because it's in real world, we can also use that information to help us with design our clinical trials. So one of the benefits of real world data is it helps us design better trials. You know, we can really relook at in terms of, again, being a global company, standard of care in the US may be different than standard of care in any other part of the world. So how is our medicine being used, or how will we be complementary maybe to a standard of care that may already be in another part of the world to be introduced? So it brings a lot of benefits. We talk a lot about it now. It's been around for a very long time. I think the one thing we always have to remember with real world data is that it's collected at point of care by physicians. We know that there's always a potential for holes in your data, whether it be in your medical record, your claims information, et cetera. So the responsibility we have really is to analyze that data and to be sure that, you know, any assumptions or any analysis we're doing, they're really fit for purpose and they're scientifically valid. So I think that's the only watch out with real world evidence that's derived from real world data.
Judy, chime in here because you and I ran into each other at a conference and mutually geeked out about like all things real world evidence, real world data, specifically synthetic control arm, which is one of my most favorite things in the entire world. But I mean, I'm curious, like, talk to me about how you're looking at this from your perspective, and like, what are some of the examples that maybe you can share, even if they're not from Pfizer, but just that some of the ways that you're looking at the way that this type of data is being integrated into clinical research that have you just super excited.
Thanks, Jessica. That's a great question. I think Rob gave a really great example of how we're using real world data with the Israel ministry as we were tracking all of those individuals within that country who were vaccinated with our COVID vaccine. So that's one specific use case, but there are other use cases as well. One that I'd like to highlight is the work that we did with Ibrance. And so we know that Ibrance is for breast cancer. And it wasn't previously indicated for men with breast cancer. And so we worked with the US FDA to really look at 3 different pieces of data. One, the efficacy data from our pivotal clinical trials. Second, real world evidence that was generated and curated from EHR and claims data to generate clinical evidence. And as Rob mentioned, we have to make sure that we're really vetting that data and looking at all the holes. And then last but not least, our internal pharmacovigilance database. And then together, when we look at and aggregate that data and analyze that data, we were able to get the first approval for an aromatase inhibitor from the FDA using this type of data and evidence. So I think that's one use case that is what we could highlight. Another is just using real world evidence in our day-to-day, and that brings us back to COVID. We used and developed real-time dashboards during the COVID vaccine trial, but now these real-time dashboards are ones that we have extended across our portfolio. So, you know, for example, in COVID, we're using various information, whether it be spread of SARS-CoV-2, whether it was incidence and prevalence, right? Death, hospitalizations, and really looking at that information as well as bans, restrictions, and otherwise to really look at, you know, how we can plan for our study. So I think this data has a lot of use cases that we can apply, not just around approvals or, you know, planning, but others as well. And so I think it's going to become something that is the heart of the way that we work going forward. So yes, is it, you asked, is it really a fad or something that is hot? I think it's something that's always been here and will continue to progress as a part of the way that we work.
That's really exciting to hear. And I think the last thing I want to ask about this topic in particular is, about like the fact that, okay, this is all always been here, but it's like it's just really like I don't know, it came into my field of view, and it seems like there's a lot more published on it recently. And I'm curious about like the barriers that still exist to the broad scale integration of real world data and real world evidence. Because I mean, to hear you two talk about it, it sounds like it's impacted everything all along in terms of the way you design your studies and all these different things, and that there's a lot of benefit to having the ability to look at the real world data in terms of proving clinical validity. But I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, so fact check me, friends, that regulatory bodies are a little bit apprehensive to look at that real world evidence because of the holes that might exist in it. Are there any other barriers that are preventing, regulators from taking that data in that we need to be aware about?
Well, I think, I could take that, Jess. And I think there's two things to look at here. One is, you're right, that there can be holes in the data. But remember also, there's a large quantity of data here. So when you look at the holes, it often becomes noise if analyzed appropriately. Each one of the regulators has to decide by themselves in terms of maybe by a therapeutic area. You spoke about synthetic control arms. Those are not widely accepted across all the therapeutic areas and all the regulators. So I think it just depends upon, the disease. It depends upon the division, for example, with the FDA as an example. And so we just have to take that all into account when you consider real world data and then the real world evidence. You do know though that, the reality is this is the wave of the future. If you think about post-marketing commitments, just as an example, typically, whether it be in pediatric or older populations or maybe indigent populations, we often have to run post-marketing commitments. Well, through the use of real world, this is a real opportunity to be able to sort of get that information much quicker than if we were running a randomized trial or an interventional trial to be able to get that information. So, I think there's different stages of acceptance of real world data. And it's not today going to replace a randomized clinical trial, but there are many opportunities for real world data, even with the regulators with that lens on in terms of how we can serve patients better.
Cool. Well, that's exciting to hear. Okay. So that's my favorite, like clinical research technology, new model, that innovation that's being put into play. But I want to hear last question for you guys. Like, I want to know what's hot for you guys. Like, I'm into this stuff, but it's like by the time it gets downstream to me, I don't even know. It's like bleeding edge. So, all right, Rob, we'll start with you. I'm gonna wrap this up
All
first. What's the bleeding edge clinical trial, clinical research model, innovation technology that you are just super excited about in terms of the way that it's going to impact the way research is done?
All right, I have two. But if you're learning about real world data and real world evidence, we're going to talk. But but actually, so I love the idea of the wearables. We're all using them today. Just about everyone we know walks around, except me, with an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something to be able to collect information. So that's the next generation of really being able to incorporate that as part of our fact base in clinical trials. Of course, the methods have to be run to make sure that, they're valid. But a lot of that's happening right now. Beyond that, even like the cool technologies, we had a technology that we used in one of our atopic dermatitis trials where we designed a device because at night, we recognized that patients were scratching. But if you're sleeping, do you know if you're scratching, right? So this would at night, when they scratch, we would pick up on that. We'd understand it was interrupting their sleep. So I think things like that are really cool where things are happening, but the patient's participant doesn't even realize it's actually collecting meaningful information. And then AI, ML, those are like, fancy words. And, they've really helped us transform our business. If you look at most of our processes that we were sort of manual, whether they be in data collection, data processing, et cetera, we developed bots. We even name our bots because we think it's kind of cool. And they really do a lot of the processing for us, AI with HI, human interaction, right? So processes happen and we're able to take a look in terms of the output and ensure that it's done well. So, we had a project as part of COVID-19 where we had so much data coming in that we would have needed, lots of people reviewing data 24/7. Well, we were able to employ an AI technology where it was learning. It was learning about data cleaning methods that we were doing to be able to clean the data. The beautiful thing about that was without the human interaction, you also don't have the human error that can get introduced. We explored this technology and are now using it also for coding, medical coding. So there's really some great areas where these technologies can really make us more efficient. We have goals in Lightspeed to be able to quickly, after we've closed the study, be able to analyze it and get that information to the regulators. The only way to do that is with automation, right? Putting more bodies on top of it creates actually potentially more quality issues or more human sort of issues. So the use of technology deployed in clinical trials, particularly on the processing of information, to me, I love it.
That's cool. I
That's
love
where
that. Jessica's a great name for a bot, by the way, if you're looking for bot names.
Okay.
All
So you
right,
have to have bots because you can retire bots, right? Because as things get better, and then it's fine
yeah,
to retire the bot.
I'm okay with that. It would be an honor just to have a bot named. All right, Judy,
All right, we'll consider that.
thank you. Question for you, same question to you. I'm curious
Sure.
about what technology just has you just really fired up about the way that, if it's implemented well, or even as it's being implemented now, has the potential to really change the future of the way pharma is done.
Sure. So I know we always talk about like, here's the next whiz bang technology that's going to change the future of health, and everything's going to be transformed. But for me, the lens that I look at, what is a hot technology, is the one that actually impacts patients' lives more broadly or deeply as we go forward. So the things that I'm really excited about are things that make information and trials more accessible to those out there who could participate or are seeking information. And so I know you might say, is your hot technology that you're excited about a website? But it absolutely is. Historically, when we were raising awareness about clinical trials, we had this trial website over here, this trial website over there, and it would only be serendipity that you happen to be searching about, an atopic dermatitis trial in Houston or whatever it may be. And one of the things that we've done is we've brought together a singular platform and solution for our participants or people who are seeking more information about clinical trials, PfizerClinicalTrials.com, where you can get education, find a trial site that is matched to a condition or an ongoing trial of interest for you. And a searchable database so that, just like you can do for everything else, hi, I'm going to look up what food I'm going to order, or hi, I'm going to look up what hotel I need to stay at. We've tried to make it really easy for those who are willing and excited to volunteer to be able to simply search, put in a few basic pieces of information, and get connected to a trial site right away. The last thing about this website that I'm super excited about is actually, we've talked a lot about diversity in this conversation, but we also need to ensure that we're providing information in languages so that more people can access it. So we've just recently translated that entire website into Spanish to better serve the Hispanic community here in the US. Last but not least, you'll say, websites you're excited about, and you're also excited about social media. Well,
Judy, no.
no, but I totally am, because you know what? That's, everyone from my 16-year-old daughter who's making TikToks to my mom who just posted yesterday about her trip to Mount Rainier, right? These are where people are spending their time. And a lot of people were spending their time on social media during the pandemic. It was almost your outlet to connect and to connect to communities. And so, we're really expanding those channels for us. And so while you might say, hi, these technologies have been around for decades, I think how we use those technologies to fit into people's lives and really reach them where they are is what I would consider cutting edge or hot to me.
No, it is. I get that. It's an existing technology being applied in a novel way. I like it. And I think that's true. I mean, you're meeting people where they are. And so that website again was PfizerClinicalTrials.com, right? The one okay, that's in multiple languages. That's very cool. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you too. I mean, this is such an area of interest. And I think not just for myself, but for so many people who are in the healthcare ecosystem, particularly on the health tech or health innovation side, because of what we saw happen during the pandemic. And I think everybody is still blown away, by having watched, a company like yours flex their muscles and just really use all the tech and all the processes and expertise that you had available available to you to jump into, be part of the rescue mission for COVID. And it's just been awesome to hear about how that's playing out and continuing to play out in your business today. So thank you again for stopping by.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to you and Judy for joining me in my gym today.
We're waiting for you to start doing, you want to bench press us out of this? I think that might be
Might have to,
doing all the heavy lifting over there at Pfizer,
We had a verbal workout together.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys so much again. For more interviews with the who's who of health tech and healthcare innovation as they are changing the way that we do health and the future of medicine in the process, please check out my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/WTF Health. Innovative approach to spreading information, right, Judy? I'm Jessica DeMassa. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.